The Holy Gospel according to John, the 10th chapter. Jesus said, "Very truly I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him, because they do not know the voice of strangers." Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again, Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved, and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." The Gospel of the Lord. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my spirit be pleasing to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Jesus begins this week's gospel with a metaphor about sheep. I do not know very much about sheep, but I do know quite a bit about the two furry animals that live in my home, especially since I have been home with them constantly for almost a month now. My two cats know my voice. They are weary of strangers and they hide under the bed as soon as the doorbell rings, but they know me. They come to me when I call them. They know when I am simply talking about them, and they know from my voice if I am praising them or scolding them, as I just was while they interrupted me trying to film this sermon. They know if I am encouraging them to play with me, or if I am saying, "Not now, your human is working." Sometimes they think they know the way on their own, but then after they have gotten themselves entangled in the blinds or shut themselves into a closet, they will call to me as if they are saying, "Human, I have made a grave error, please help." They know that they need someone to care for them, even if they do not like to admit it. Jesus uses a metaphor about sheep, but you can fill in the blank with any domestic animal in your life whom you love. Animals, be it cats or sheep or dogs or horses, know the voices of the humans who love and care for them. They know they are provided with safety and security and things that they need, and they respond accordingly. In the gospel for today, Jesus tells the disciples this story about sheep who know the voice of the shepherd and follow him. Just like my cats who know and listen to my voice, they listen most of the time anyways, the sheep respond to the shepherd but do not respond to strangers. They know to stay with the shepherd who is safe and to stay away from thieves or bandits or other things that might cause harm. This seems at the outset like a simple story, and one that is easy to understand. We are obviously the sheep, and Jesus is obviously the shepherd. He calls out to us, and we know his voice, and we willingly follow him and stay with him without wandering off or listening to other voices that we hear. But I just do not think that this metaphor really works that well. Our lives are full of competing voices. We are called in so many different directions. It is not hard to remember how in our pre-pandemic lives we were constantly running from one thing to the next. Work calls us and demands our attention. We are pulled in different directions as we struggle to balance family, social lives, careers, and our faith. And now, even when our busy lives have been slowed down in some ways, we are not free from a myriad of voices that seem to demand us to listen. We must learn new ways of doing things, and many different voices are telling us many different things each day about the best things to do in this unprecedented situation. To whom do we listen? One thing that I do know about sheep is that they are supposedly not the smartest animals. Jesus was not the only one to use them as a metaphor for creatures who placidly follow a leader for better or for worse. During these confusing days, we might feel like confused sheep. To which voice do we listen? Who do we follow? We bumble this way and that way. It is not as apparent in today's world who our shepherd is. I am not very good at being a sheep like the sheep in the story, who always seem to know who to listen to and who to run from. I am more like a confused sheep who turns to run to every voice that it hears, thinking that this way surely is the right one, until the real shepherd must come and rescue me from the tangle I have gotten myself into. The passage tells us that the disciples were also confused by Jesus' story. We don't know why for sure, but I can imagine it being a similar reason to our own confusion. Perhaps they too heard this story about sheep and shepherds and couldn't see how it fit with their lives. We all know that the disciples had many of their own problems with hearing Jesus' voice and following him. They got confused when he spoke in parables like this one. They refused to believe or listen to anything that had to do with Jesus' upcoming death. They were unable to trust him or to follow him into the midst of confusing or potentially dangerous situations, and during Jesus' crucifixion, they all abandoned him. Even though the disciples had left everything to follow Jesus, their discipleship was not as easy as this parable makes it seem. Jesus often challenged the popular religious attitudes, ideas, and actions of his day, so following him meant great risk socially and brought about risk of real danger. They did not always know if it was smart to listen to him. Perhaps they often wondered if they shouldn't just go back to their fishnets and back to their normal, not so risky lives. Perhaps their friends or family told them that they should do just that. Nothing that the disciples had so far experienced was anything like the metaphor of a shepherd calmly leading his sheep through a beautiful, idyllic pasture, and it was not going to get any easier. So Jesus explains the metaphor for his confused listeners, but the explanation is surprising. After everything he said about sheep hearing the shepherd's voice and following him, Jesus does not say that he is the shepherd. Instead, he says, "I am the gate." The disciples might have wanted to ask him, "Are you sure? It sounded a lot like you were saying that you were the shepherd, but now you say that you are a gate." As in many of his parables, the explanation is even more confusing than the parable itself. What do gates do? Gates can keep out and exclude. We might think of the term gatekeeping or of the measures we have in place to limit the spread of COVID-19. Social distancing is meant to work like a metaphorical gate, shutting out the virus, making it more difficult for it to come in contact with you or to enter your home or places of work. But it is not likely, from what we know of Jesus, that he would want to be a gate for the purpose of exclusion. It is a little ironic that our first thought about gates is that they are used to close and lock and shut out. Because if that is what we wanted to do, we would build a wall, not a gate. Gates are primarily ways in. The St. Louis Arch is also called the Gateway Arch because the city of St. Louis is known as the gateway to the West. During the days of the Oregon Trail, when people were traveling west by covered wagon, St. Louis was an entrance point to the western United States. It symbolized an opening, a way in, not just to a new physical space, but to a new life for those who passed through. Those traveling west were beginning a journey where they left everything old that they used to be behind in the east and realized new potential and possibilities in this great new expanse of land called the West. They went through this gate to begin life anew. That sounds much more like the kind of gate that Jesus would be. In fact, that process of leaving behind the old and beginning a new life sounds exactly like baptism. Baptism is like an open gateway that calls us through to something completely different than what we were before, to a new life in relationship with Christ, to a life as children of God. Jesus says that he came in order to bring about abundant life. Going through Jesus as the gate, we begin a new kind of abundant life, life that is totally different from the life we had before. Life where we no longer have to answer to the competing voices of the world because Jesus' voice is the only one that has any hold over us. Life where even when the entire world feels uncertain as it does now, we know who is our shepherd and cannot wander out of the pasture, no matter what might befall us and no matter what we might bring upon ourselves. Jesus is, of course, both the gate and the shepherd in this metaphor, as confusing as that may be. It is not up to us to hear and recognize Jesus' voice and choose it over all the other many voices we hear in our daily lives. Jesus heard all of those competing worldly voices in his life too, and he already chose for us. He listened to the voice calling him to the way of the cross, and risen from the dead, he brings us along that same way and into an abundant life. Jesus does not tell us that an abundant life will be an easy life or a painless life or a life free from trial or immune to pandemics. But it does mean that all the worldly voices that we might hear do not have the final say in our lives. By going through the gate, we now hear Jesus' voice calling us instead, saying that we are all loved as children of God, and calling us to share that love with others because all people are welcome to this abundant life. Jesus, as the gate, does not separate us from the world. Jesus, the gate, shuts no one out, but instead is open to all. Jesus, as the shepherd, demonstrates this abundant life for all people by leading the way not just into green pastures, but also into the midst of the most difficult circumstances. And since we are set free from the voices of the world, he calls all of us not only to hear his voice, but to echo it in all that we say and do. Amen.